Welcome to Let's Talk Criterion, a weekly edition taking a look at the latest Criterion releases. This week we look at the double bill set Yojimbo and Sanjuro, two samurai films from the Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, coming to the collection in 4K UHD. Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa directed 31 films from 1943 to 1993, with his first film being Sanjuro Sogata, and his last film being Madadayo. He directed the recent Criterion 4K upgrade, Seven Samurai, back in 1954. Now we're going to take a look at his 1961 and 1962 films, Yojimbo and Sanjuro. They're both getting an upgrade to 4K in the Criterion collection. Now the collection has many of his titles already available as single title releases, as well of course as a out-of-print DVD box set of his films, AK100, 25 films by him. Now many hope that this will get an upgrade to Blu-ray in the future. Yojimbo was made at the end of Kurosawa's most fruitful period of movie making. Over the span of 11 years, he crafted more than half dozen memorable motion pictures, beginning with Rashomon and including such classics as Seven Samurai and The Hidden Fortress. Now, by the time Yojimbo was released in 1961, Kurosawa was a well-known name all around the world. He never actually made a film in America, but his properties were coveted by the major US studios, as certainly can be seen by the number of Hollywood remakes of Kurosawa's films. There's a sense of symmetry surrounding the development of Yojimbo especially. The movie was conceived and designed as an homage to that most American of films, and that of course is the Western. From the empty, wind-swept street, stretching the length of the town to the arrival of the stoic stranger, images familiar to viewers of 40s and 50s Hollywood westerns abound. In fact, one can be forgiven looking for the OK Corral. Fittingly, a mere 3 years later, Yojimbo was remade for more widespread Western consumption by the director Sergio Leone as A Fistful of Dollars, the movie that introduced the world to the spaghetti Western and made Clint Eastwood into a film star. Now, this was not the only remake, of course, of Yojimbo. Walter Hill took a crack at the film with the ill-advised Last Man Standing with Bruce Willis. Now, regarding A Fistful of Dollars, Kurosawa has always maintained that he liked that particular treatment of his story. Now, the film Yojimbo transpires in 1860 Japan. The main character of the film, Sanjuro, played in the film by Toshiro Mifune, is a ronin. Now, a ronin is a samurai with no master. He's a mercenary, making his way through the world using his two most potent weapons, and that is his sword and his wits. And during his travels, he comes upon a desolate town where two rival gangs are warring over control of territory. There's a local sake seller, that's Gonji, played in the film by Eljiro Tono, and he tells Sanjuro the story of how Sebai, played by Seizayabudo Kawazu, and Uzitora, played by Kyo Sanzanka, were once partners. But a rift developed between them, and now they're at war with each other. Sanjuro is intrigued, seeing the opportunity to profit by this situation and kill a great many of these worthless cards. So he barters off his services to the highest bidder, and then he begins to play a dangerous game by seemingly aligning himself with both sides. A double agent, you would have to say there. His undoing occurs when he shows himself not to be as callous as he appears. By helping a captive woman to escape from Uzitora's clutches, he leaves himself somewhat vulnerable. Now, Sanjuro is pretty much what you would call a superhero. But, of course, like every Superman, he has his kryptonite. Despite his seeming immorality, he proves that he possesses a conscience, and indeed a single act of compassion nearly costs him his whole life. His enemies think that depriving Sanjuro of his sword renders him helpless, much like many superheroes, but they ignore their adversary's formidable intelligence, possibly because their own is so low. Even without a sword, Sanjuro is a force to be reckoned with. With one, he's unstoppable. And while there's plenty of action and adventure in Yojimbo, the film still contains enough dry humour that some have hailed it as a comedy. Now, certainly Kurosawa lampoons the conventions of the Western as often as he actually honours them, and much of the movie's understated wit is in fact the result of Sanjuro's openly mocking approach to the pettiness surrounding him. Now, the former samurai has fun playing games with these two bosses by allowing each to believe that he has the advantage over the other one. And of course, then he uses that information to provoke a clash between the two. And on one particular occasion, after providing the catalyst for a battle between the two sides, Sanjuro finds a high vantage point and watches the skirmish unfold with great amusement. And as is often the case with idiots, one particular character, that's Inokishi, is certainly good for a laugh or two. Now, Yojimbo never takes itself too seriously. There is one instance of brutal torture in the film, but it actually occurs off-screen to blunt its impact on the viewer. And we see the results of the torture, but not the actual torture itself. But nevertheless, that point marks a shift in tone in the film. The comedic undercurrent seeps away, and the movie becomes a tale of revenge. And from that moment until the actual conclusion, light-hearted moments are few and far between. And the return of the superhero feels a little more grim than it does grand. Now, Kurosawa had frequently explored the notion that the world was an irredeemable place, but Yojimbo's comic detachment enabled him to despair of villagers without judging them. And what he is condemning in the film is the capitalist impulse that causes them to stake and eventually, of course, to lose everything in order to gain that little bit more. Now, it may seem ironic that a wandering warrior should in fact endure the life of adventure, but his advice to the farmer's son that he gives, he spares at the end of a climactic slaughter, is to stay at home and to make the best of what he's got. And that is the message that Kurosawa hoped to impart to restlessly rebellious Japanese youth by slipping it under the violence in the film that they paid to see in the cinema. Yojimbo has a running time of 96 minutes, and we have a 239:1 aspect ratio on the 4K UHD box set edition and a 235:1 aspect ratio on the Blu-ray, with a new restored 4K digital transfer with an uncompressed mono soundtrack. There's an optional Dolby Digital 3.0 soundtrack, preserving the original Perspective simulated stereo effects, and that's on the Blu-ray edition. An audio commentary by the film historian and Kurosawa scholar Stephen Prince. A 45-minute documentary on the making of Yojimbo, created as part of the Toho Masterworks series Akira Kurosawa, It Is Wonderful to Create, and that features Kurosawa actor Tatsuya Nakadai, production designer Yoshiro Mogaki, and the longtime Kurosawa collaborator Teruyo Nogami. Theatrical teaser and trailer, still gallery of behind-the-scenes photos, new and improved English translation for subtitles, and a booklet featuring a new essay by film scholar Alexander Sezonsk and comments from Kurosawa and his cast and crew. And the cover art is the original design by Lucien S.Y. Yang. And Yojimbo retains its original spine number of 52 in the collection. And following up for that, we have a sequel to that film that to many is a masterpiece. It's quite a bold move. If anyone could pull off such a feat, it would certainly be Akira Kurosawa. And once more into the fray we go, with a film that details a weary, lonesome traveller set on helping out young, budding heroes in their quest for good. Now, based on the story by Shigeru Yamamoto, whose novel would be the inspiration for Kurosawa's later film, Redbeard, this splendid samurai satire Sanjuro was conceived before Yojimbo, and initially was to focus on an internet whose quick wits atoned for his shortcomings with a sword. However, Yojimbo's success persuaded Akira to rework the screenplay, which was originally to have been directed by Hiromichi Horikawa, before the studio asked Kurosawa to take over. Now, it would prove to be one of his most enjoyable assignments, and his fondness for the scenario shines through the numerous instances of ribald humour. Sanjuro's first meeting with the junior samurai is particularly amusing, as Kurosawa contrasts their prim Bushido eagerness with the older man's unkempt cynicism. With their gung-ho energy, virtuous enthusiasm, and meticulous attire, Uzo Kayama's comrades in arms are right out of the Jidegeki textbook, and Kurosawa delights throughout in mocking generic convention, right down to exploiting such kabuki clichés as the flowing stream as a means of conveying messages. Sanjuro offers us a nice companion piece to that of Yojimbo, a pair that don't necessarily connect with one another in a narrative sense, but in a sense of thematic prose, pragmatics and a style. And I had high hopes for this, a group that is trying to weed out the villainy, taking hold of their honest, honour-bound tradition, which is all the sentiment necessary to provide a fulfilling exploration of the samurai. So we dive right into this story without even an introduction to Toshiro Mifune's character. We're thrown right into the fray and the violence, and no time at all is spent on building up this mysterious character. Knowing of the character and of Yojimbo isn't crucial here, but it does provide you with a handful of insights you'd otherwise be missing out on. He's a wizened warrior, already established by encounters of the previous film, and he looks to aid a group of go-getting fighters with their hearts in the right place. It's a certainly interesting tale. The sage advice of Mifune makes for some creative moments, some of which far exceed the technical merits of the original. Now, I don't think on the whole, though, that this product is overall superior to that of Yojimbo. There are frequently tense scenes. There are moments that provide heart-stopping thrills, combining this with some incredible swordplay, marvellous choreography, and a very strong story which is supported by dedicated performances from the actors. And you have yet another example of just how great Kurosawa was at directing passionate stories entailing freedom or indeed the protection of the average person. His sincere care is reflected nicely with our titular leading character. Far more growth to offer us in this film, Sanjuro has some relatively strong moments of character-based charm that deal more with the subjects the film muses on. Now, the duel in the film remains Sanjuro's most memorable scene, and not only because it concludes the film itself, but because it does so with such an unforgettable bang. Positioned face to face, Mifune and Nakadai, mirroring their final scene together in Yojimbo, stand off for a clocked 26 seconds of silence, an excruciatingly long period of suspense indeed, and the technician who controlled the pressurized pump which sprayed Maruto's fake blood, a batch of chocolate syrup and carbonated water, from Nakadai's torso, was worried that the effect would not please Kurosawa, and overcompensated by adding 30 pounds of extra pressure. So when the scene commenced filming, and Mifune cuts with split-second speed with his sword, fake blood shoots out like a geyser, and the larger-than-life outcome wholly staggering and uncharacteristic when compared to the rest of the violence in the rest of the film, pleased Kurosawa a lot, and its exaggerated quality echoes the base thrill both the young samurai and the audience feel towards the spectacle. And or even for a violent film, this last act of violence remains the ugliest and, of course, the most horrible. Now, among Kurosawa's most well-balanced films, Sanjuro resigns with equal parts artistic intent and sheer entertainment value. The quality of Kurosawa's greatest works, I would say. An argument can be made that the sequel betters its predecessor by adding a human dimension to the mythological anti-hero from Yojimbo, who, instead of descending upon a small village like a god to unleash retribution, this time he's brought down to earth by humbling comments from the Chamberlain's wife. An undefeatable presence between two pathetic Yakuza gangs, Kurosawa redefines the character in his sequel and complicates his mythology, and avoids that typical sequel mistake that many directors make of giving audiences more of a proven formula. Now, an audience might walk away from Yojimbo and overlook the social implications of the film, mistaking the picture for escapist entertainment void of commentary, but after they've seen Sanjuro, no one can deny the powerful message Kurosawa imparts. Sanjuro has a running time of 95 minutes, and it's an existing spine for 53, with the following special features for both films, which have been ported over from the original Blu-ray release. 4K digital restorations with uncompressed mono soundtrack in 4K, restored high-definition digital transfers with uncompressed mono soundtrack on the Blu-ray. In the 4K UHD edition, there's 2 4K UHD discs of the films and 2 Blu-rays, with the films and these special features. Optional DTS HD Master Audio Perspecta 3.0 soundtracks, preserving the original simulated stereo effects. Audio commentary by Kurosawa scholar Stephen Prince on Sanjuro. A documentary on the making of Sanjuro, created as part of the Toho Masterworks series, Akira Kurosawa, It Is Wonderful to Create. Teasers and trailers, stills galleries of behind-the-scenes photos, and a written essay from the film writers Alexandra Sazonska and Michael Sagrao, and comments from Kurosawa and members of his casts and crews. Cover art for Sanjuro, same theme as Yojimbo, by Lucien S.Y. Yang. Shooting began on Yojimbo in January of 1961, and it was completed on April the 16th, and because Kurosawa edited during the production, the film was released 4 days later, on April the 20th, 1961. And since Sanjuro required only minor rewriting to convert the earlier draft into the sequel to Yojimbo, production for that commenced on September the 25th, 1961, and ended December the 20th of that year, with the finished film premiering January the 1st, 1962. The speed and artistic showmanship with which these two films were shot, edited and released is staggering, especially by today's standards, taking into consideration the detail Kurosawa integrates into his pictures. The main setting, a Chamberlain's house, and the pond in front, a separating wall with a compound on one side, and the sanctuary house on the other, were built as open sets on Toho's largest stage. Kurosawa oversaw every detail personally, from the vast layout down to the crucial look of the camellias on the trees, which made the director insist be handmade to make sure each one looked just right. At his prime, Kurosawa's meticulous, even autocratic control over his productions fully justified the nickname he was given, the Emperor. And I'd also like to mention that BFI in the UK are also planning to release these two films in March 17th to be exact, on 4K UHD, but with a Dolby Vision HDR grade. Now, they seem to favour this with the black and white releases they produce, where Criterion tend to prefer the pure Toho restorations without HDR added, and not to add any Dolby Vision grading either. Now, I know this has led to much discussion about this on the Criterion forums online. Now, the BFI release will contain a newly recorded interview with Jasper Sharp, recorded last year, and Jasper Sharp is an author, curator, filmmaker and Arrow disc producer with a specialist interest in Japanese cinema. Next week on Let's Talk Criterion, we'll be taking a look at the Jean Eustace film from 1973, The Mother and the Whore, getting a 4K UHD release in the collection. So until then, from me, as always, it's goodbye, and above all, good Criterion viewing.